Michael Lewis, how many books have you written, by the way?
I don't know.
I looked it up, and it kept going and going and going
I
and
know.
going.
It's just I don't know. The distinction needs to be made. There's a list there in front of this book. Some of them are books, and some of them are book-like objects.
What do you mean?
I mean, so it's one thing to sit down like this and write and plot, create, structure a whole book. And it's another to write 4 magazine articles and put them together in a book. And so Boomerang or The Fifth Risk or The Money Culture, those are all, I mean, I'll defend them, but they were book-like objects, not books.
All right, I have 16, I counted.
No, there's 16 things.
Yes. 16, I think most of these were books.
Yeah, 16 items, and I bet 6 of them were book-like objects.
Really?
Yes.
Well, let's talk about the stars aligning. Your book is coming out at the same time Sam Bankman-Fried is on trial.
Yep.
I mean, did you all plan this? Was this serendipitous? How did this happen?
We kind of planned it. Well, I knew I started writing this thing at the end of January, and I know it usually takes me 6 months once I've got all my stuff. And so I knew when I'd have it finished. So they knew when they arranged. They knew it was coming out in the fall. But then they announced the trial date, and it made sense. Oddly, the trial was supposed to start Monday, but the judge has some personal reason he wanted to start it Tuesday. So he actually the book was launched on the day of the trial. So, it's part of me, it kills me that I'm not there because I've seen the list of the prosecutor's witnesses who they're likely to call, and it maps very closely on the characters in the book. So it'd be like it's like watching, characters from a novel come to life or something like that. It feels like that.
We're going to get into the intricacies a little bit, simplified, of the trial and the crimes, et cetera. But I want to go back to the beginning, Michael, because you're almost a literary anthropologist. I find your book so interesting because I think, in fairness, I saw this on 60 Minutes, but you take a character and that character becomes emblematic of another big issue. And you met with this young man more than 100 times over 2 years. So if you had to use one word to describe what your experience, what your time was like with SBF, as he's called, what word would that be?
I'm going to choose a strange one. Satiric. In that right from the beginning, he struck me as walking social satire. He'd gone from zero to having $22 billion in about 18 months. And all of society had reorganized itself around this pile of money. And everywhere he goes, what is either happening to him or his observations, because he's a Martian. He comes from another planet and he sees the world in just a different way. It felt like social satire. So satiric. It felt, this is going to sound very odd given these circumstances. It was funny. It was funny and sad. Funny and sad go together. But there was a lot of funny, and so satiric. That's the thing that comes.
And surreal, and something that almost sounds like the pages of a Tom Wolfe novel, honestly. So I just watched a documentary about Tom Wolfe. You're heavily featured. I loved it, by the way. It was based on your profile of Tom Wolfe in Vanity Fair. And, as I read about Sam, I thought, whoa, this is the kind of thing Tom Wolfe, the kind of person, the kind of creature Tom Wolfe would have been all over. Do you agree?
I agree, especially early Wolfe. He wrote these pieces that were fabulous about Silicon Valley people.
Right.
Before the internet, right? It was like the semiconductor people. But it was like these people are of the moment and they're changing the culture in some way. Also, the Merry Pranksters, that crowd. This is a version of the Merry Pranksters. These people who are rolling through the world just creating disruption wherever they go. He would have been drawn to Sam Bankman-Fried. So yes, I think that's completely true.
Do you think that SBF represents capitalism at its worst, in a way?
It represents capitalism at its most chaotic. And there's a reason for that. He was drawn to chaos from when he figured out that he excelled relative to other people in these semi-chaotic environments where his mathy brain still was useful, but he needed it to be really messy at the same time. It couldn't be orderly, couldn't be structured, couldn't be perfectly predictable. When he figured that out, figured that out on Wall Street when he's 21 years old. He then proceeds to create those environments in which he'll succeed.
So he thrives in chaos.
He thrives in mess and chaos, and he knows how everybody else doesn't. So at some level, and so he feels most comfortable when that's the environment. He's also capitalism at its most current. I mean, if you think about history, just put him in some sort of historical context. You think, oh, this is just how it is now. Mark Zuckerberg is a bit like this. He came out of nowhere and had billions of dollars instantly. But that doesn't really happen in history. Like most people who got this rich, they had to like dig oil out of ground,
right,
build railroads, build stuff, build companies. This instant acquisition of a fortune is so peculiarly of now, and among the things that's so odd about it is that the person who in possession of the fortune is a stranger to the world. Like nobody knows who they are. He goes from being nobody and he has no social relations kind of thing to being at the center of some universe instantly before anybody has a chance to figure out should he be, you know. So that's a curious feature of modern capitalism, I think.
And this guy is a singularly unique figure. I mean, even more fascinating to me than Mark Zuckerberg, just because he is.
What interested you? You read it?
What,
so what was it?
I'd like to know how his mind works. He struck me as someone who might be kind of like Rain Man, honestly. Mm-hmm. I wondered about sort of his particular way of thinking. Does he have autism? Is there, what is it with the deck of cards and the moving his feet and sort of his whole, I mean, how do you even put it, Michael? His whole frame of reference. And I wanted to understand his brain.
Yeah.
I wanted to get into Sam Bankman. I wanted to get into
Sam Bankman-Fried's brain.
Yes.
Yes, I did too.
You did, because you spent so much time with him. I want to hear about that in a moment, but first you start the preface of the book. You say, I first heard about Sam Bankman-Fried at the end of 2021 from a friend who, oddly enough, wanted me to help him figure out who he was. So this guy is saying to you, Michael, can you suss this guy out? I want to invest in crypto, but I don't really, I want to see what his character is like, as you talk about. So you meet this guy, you guys take a walk, you take a hike in California. So tell me, you meet someone, what was your first impression?
First impression was there's a kind of artlessness about him and an openness and a willingness to talk about things that normally people wouldn't be easy talking about, like how much money he had, where did it come from, how crazy it was he had it, that his parents didn't know what to make of it because they were two professors at Stanford and he was raised not caring about money. And it was that kind of just trying to figure out. So first impression was he was also very peculiar, that he was disheveled. When he came out, he always looks like he just fell out of a dumpster, right? I mean,
he looks like an unmade bed.
Oh, my God, yes. Yeah, an unmade bed on top of an unmade bed. He looks, and it was the total absence of interest in his own appearance, the total in his headness. So normally when you meet somebody, it's an exchange, right? They ask questions about you. You ask questions about them.
Let me guess. He asked you no questions.
Zero. I'm going to tell you something. 2 years later, he's still not asked me any questions. So he has, as far as I know, he knows nothing about me and knows nothing about what I was writing about, knows nothing about he never asked me, like, what's the book going to look like? Nothing. So it was all one way.
He sounds like it's so interesting because he's this odd combination, and we'll talk about this in a moment too. And I want to get too ahead of myself. An incredible desire to do good without any emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that's true.
Like this strange combination.
Yes. One of his colleagues, this didn't even end up in the book, but one of his close colleagues who dealt with all the emotional fallout from Sam's lack of interest in emotions. So all the employees are always upset, especially the ones who are reporting to him because he's not paying any attention to their feelings. And he said, but Sam's gotten much better in the last year or two. He said he's outsourced some of his IQ to EQ. that he's somehow sort of like manufactured some EQ in there, so it's gotten a little better. If you'd known him 5 years ago, you wouldn't have believed how emotionally uninterested he was and how much emotionally clueless. But you're right. It's this combination of like this massive brain able to do really interesting things with a total deadness to human feeling, including, it's not hypocritical, including his own. Like that he was quite open about the fact that he sensed that other people felt all these things he didn't feel, and he felt cut off from the experience of being human because he couldn't feel them. He's just born that way.
Well, let's talk about his childhood. As you mentioned, his parents were two Stanford law professors who I guess are having their own legal problems right now, right? I mean, they've been sued for their involvement in this whole enterprise. But tell us about where he grew up, what his life was like. And, I'm curious about the nurture-nature aspect of him. Help us understand him.
His parents, both tax law professors at Stanford.
That sounds boring.
Yeah, well, unless that's your cup of tea, right?
Yeah, I guess
and the kind
you're right.
of person for whom that's like a cup of tea is a different kind of person. They like to live in their head. And tax law does get to kind of like structure of society questions, like how you distribute wealth, and it isn't just like
Numbers.
It isn't just numbers. It's ideas. They're two people who live for ideas.
To all the tax lawyers out there, I deeply apologize.
Do I need to too? I mean,
No,
okay. So
you're defending them and saying it's ideas.
But they sat in the middle of actually a pretty active, interesting social circle. They were very social people. Their dinner parties on Sunday nights were famous on the Stanford campus. Their son struck even their friends as peculiar right from the beginning. And one comment that stuck with me is one of the distinguished guests at the Sunday night dinner party said he always thought that the parents were afraid for and of Sam. Like they were worried about where he was going to end up in the world because he didn't make social connections. He was so isolated as a kid. Barbara, the mother, said there were a couple moments where she realized he couldn't be parented like a normal kid. The first was she took him to like an amusement park, like that's what you're supposed to do. And they're going from ride to ride, and she notices that he's not taking any obvious pleasure in it, but she's looking at him. And he looks up and he says, "So, Mom, are you having fun yet?" And she realized that he was just there because he thought she needed to be there. And so she's kind of cut off the second thing was she handed him at one point, again, little kid, one of her abstruse academic papers. And he read it and started asking her questions that she said were better than the questions she got from the peer review process.
How old was he?
Like 10. It's in the book.
God.
I mean, he's young. And she said at that point she just gave up. It's like he's just going to be... And the feeling of his childhood, to me, talking to him and to those around him, was that he was just waiting for it to end. That he was waiting for everybody else to grow up around him so that he would have people to talk to, because he did not ever connect to peers. He had one friend, and the one friend was a child of his parents' friend. So they were kind of put together that way. And they were connected through this game they played called Magic: The Gathering, which is a complicated, it's a messy chaos but mathy card game. And they didn't really have to talk about much because they just played cards together the whole time. So it's an unusual childhood. I mean, I asked.
But it doesn't sound necessarily unhappy, just different.
That kept coming back to this. It sounds sad, but he's not sad. It sounds almost tragic. He didn't feel tragic. He felt like he was living in his own head, trying to make sense of the world around him in his own peculiar way.
So let's talk about was he ever diagnosed with autism? I mean, it just was screaming out to me when I saw him in that 60 Minutes profile.
Yeah.
I thought, clearly he is on the spectrum. Now, I'm not an expert in autism, and I also don't want to be insensitive because I'm not, I don't know a ton about autism. But clearly, to me, the shuffling of cards constantly, that he always has the deck of cards in his hands, and the way he moves his feet, the way there was a lack of eye contact. Never diagnosed with any kind of...
No. I
find that really hard to believe.
Well, I can understand why you find it hard to believe. but he
Didn't you? You must have.
Well, you know what's funny about him? Everything you described is kind of textbook on the spectrum kind of stuff. He's a package that I've never seen before. Like, I think there needs to be another spectrum, and it's for example, incredibly acute at picking up on your emotions, like seeing what you're thinking and what you're feeling, which in my experience, that's not what you get usually from the condition. So, so verbally facile and so interested in the world around him that
And yet never asked you a question. So that doesn't really jibe.
Yeah, no, it doesn't jibe. But he's interested in ideas, and so he doesn't. So he really reads as like, I've never seen someone like this before, rather than, oh, he's in a box with other people like this. It almost, I didn't ever use any kind of word. I didn't use the word autism or Asperger's or anything like that in the book because I didn't want to put him in that, even suggest to the reader's mind that box, because I felt it was a whole other box he needed to be in.
Never asked him about it or never talked to his parents about it. It just surprises me.
It came up once, and I didn't ask. He asked me whether I thought it was wise for him to get himself diagnosed as autistic. And
wise.
How so? He was thinking about doing it before his trial, and
what, to gain sympathy?
I don't know. I said I didn't know what he was, and I said to him, I blurted out, "I don't think you are. I think you're something else. I think that it's not simple that way."
What did he say?
He just listened. It's interesting. I had several conversations with him over the 18 months I spent with him, where he would seem to ask my advice. It was asking me a question, wasn't about myself, but he'd ask my advice about something or ask my view of something. And afterwards, I always had the feeling that he actually didn't care what my view was. That he was like, you notice what it felt like? It felt like more like I was part of a poll. That he was going to ask 100 people this question, and then he was going to take those answers and he was going to calculate what the right answer was.
But he didn't really value.
He didn't value my particular opinion. So he just took it in, and that was it.
So, I mean, it's so fascinating. And let's talk about his sort of raison d'etre. So he had a dream, and that was to make a shitload of money and give it away, something that's called effective altruism, which actually I hadn't heard of before. I mean, I know the idea of it,
right,
but I'd never heard of that term.
Yeah. Movement is fascinating.
And, well, tell me about the movement and how he got sucked into it.
Right. So there's a whole intellectual prehistory we don't need to get into. The modern version of it is Oxford professors, 2008-ish or so, start to make an argument that very little cost to yourself, you middle-class English person, could give away money so effectively that, what might cost you a cup of coffee saves a life in Africa. And so how can you possibly buy that cup of coffee for yourself if you could save a life in Africa with that same money? And they actually start to make the calculations on their own salaries. Like, if we take everything but what we absolutely need to live on, what over our lifetimes could we accomplish? And it was like, we save 80,000 African children from blindness. There's some numbers like that. And they start to kind of put these ideas out to young people, actually kind of almost like you build a religion or a cult. They give talks on college campuses where there are a lot of mathy, nerdy, spectrum-y kids who hear this, like, you can turn the problem of what you do with your life into a math problem. You're going to maximize the number of lives you save with the actions you take, basically philanthropic actions.
When does this whole movement start?
About 2008, 2009. But by 2012, when one of these philosophers, named Will McGaskill, gives a talk that Sam hears at MIT. It's in Cambridge, at Harvard, but he was at MIT. McGaskill is morphed a little bit. The movement morphs like a few times, but this big morph was, the idea was, all right, you kid, you could go become a doctor and go to Africa, and in your lifetime you would save 200 people's lives. Or you could go work at a high frequency trading firm on Wall Street and make lots of money and pay 50 doctors to go to Africa and save 50 times the number of lives. So the idea is earn to give. And that's the idea that animates Sam. It's like, up to that point, money's not on his radar screen. It's not like, I don't really care about it, doesn't think about it. He's a kid of 2 professors at Stanford who probably thinks he's going to become a professor. Has no kind of direction. This gives him direction and purpose and a way to count how his life is going. So he sets it. So yes, I'm going to make as much money as possible and give it away to save lives. Now, where the movement gets really a little out there is right after he gets into it, it morphs again. And it ceases to be, and they start to argue about like the math of saving lives. And yeah, you could give your dollars to save that kid's life in Africa, but those same dollars could be given to reduce certain existential risks to humanity. A pandemic that wipes out the species, AI out of control, climate change, risk of nuclear war. And if you can do anything to tilt the odds against all future human beings being wiped out, the math suggests you should do that rather than save living, breathing ones now. And
so it swings to prevention.
To prevention. That's to prevention of a thing that's going to be very hard to know whether you succeeded or not, because what you're trying to do is stop something from happening.
Right.
But it also becomes very grandiose that the sums of money required to build, I don't know, a global disease prediction system that's better than what we have, because no government's doing it right now, is hundreds of billions of dollars. So all of a sudden there's a reason not to make just a few million, that this is like unlimited sums of money. Infinite money is what we need. And that's the climate in which Sam comes of age and develops his own life ambition.
So he wants more and more and more and more for good.
Yeah. And let me make one more point, is that more, not just more, but the 20 billionth dollar or the trillionth dollar is as valuable as the 999 billionth dollar. That it's just like there's no diminishing returns. It's sort of like that. It's most rich people.
Well, he didn't even care about returns.
No, that's right.
At all.
No, that's right.
Right, diminishing or otherwise.
Right, that's right. That's true. So anyway, so that's sort of like that's the air he was breathing.
So that captures his attention, gives him purpose, and he settles on 2 causes: pandemic prevention, which you mentioned, and then protecting democracy, or
So so that's controversial, right? He has these effective altruists. It is a movement. There are thousands of people involved in it. It has certain cult-like qualities, but it's also kind of like an anti-cult because they're all into argument and reason. So the movement can change. Like someone makes a better argument and it goes a different direction. And Sam makes a new argument that actually irritates all the effective altruists. It's that in addition to climate change, AI, pandemics, asteroids, whatever, Donald Trump should be on that list.
Right. Well, basically his argument is that you need government. Government is essential, and this is, of course, arguable and debatable, but government is essential to solve some of the most intractable societal problems. So we have to protect government, we have to protect democracy, and that means basically neutralizing Donald Trump at any cost.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Right?
Yes. It's sort of like democracy. If American democracy fails, democracy is going to fail. And democracy is the best tool for addressing these problems. And so Donald Trump his name has been added to this list of existential risks to humanity.
And he, in fact, offers $50 billion to...
5.
Oh, sorry. He, in fact, offers $5 billion. Yeah, $50 billion would be pretty hard to resist, wouldn't it? But $5 billion to Donald Trump to not run for president of the United States, which apparently gets some traction, but then everything falls apart.
Yeah, so I was on a plane with Sam Bankman-Fried. He was on his way to Washington to have dinner with Mitch McConnell.
Which is hilarious in and of itself, but yeah,
yes.
Go ahead.
And I thought he was coming out of his mouth was just fiction. And it was coming out of his mouth was, we have a line into the Trump people. And we're trying to get a number about what it would take, what we have to pay Donald Trump not to run for president. Now, he said at the same time we have a line into the lawyers to figure out whether this is even legal. Can you pay someone not to run for president? Is it a bribe? Whatever. And my first reaction was, how on earth are you going to enforce this contract? If I'm Donald Trump, I say, sure, I'll take your $5 billion. And then I change my mind the next day and I go run for president. I couldn't see how it was going to work. But at the same time, I thought, how real is this? Like, is there really a line into Donald Trump? Like, he did have pretty serious Republican operatives, Sam did, but I just couldn't believe this conversation. But in the same conversation, he says, we're worried about this Missouri Senate race. And in the race, it was a primary, a Republican primary at the time. There were two Republicans who looked like they were could win. One was named Eric Greitens. The other was named Eric Schmidt. Eric Greitens was a clear, real Trumper, like tear it down. The election's rigged, all that. Eric Schmidt was clearly a phony Trumper. He would say nice things about Donald Trump, and maybe he'd say the elections, we got to look into it, but he was
more of a Mitt Romney Republican.
Or at least a Mitch McConnell Republican. And Sam said, our people we've been thinking about how we neutralize Trump in this election. Because if he comes out and he says he's for Greitens, like Greitens could win. And they come up with, he's telling me all this. We've come up with this idea, he says. We're going to tell Trump, all you care about is you want to be associated with a winner. So just say you're for Eric. They're both named Eric. And you never say which Eric you're for. And he said, Trump will love this. It'll be a meme. Whichever Eric wins, he can claim he did it. And I'm thinking, this seems preposterous too. 2 days later, Trump comes out on True Social and says, I'm for Eric. And
did he ever meet with him? Did he ever meet?
Never met with him personally.
Who did he meet with? People high up in his circle?
Sam. So the way Sam's, best I can tell, political operation worked is it essentially had two almost identical parts, one Republican, one Democrat. He hired a bunch of Republicans in one silo and a bunch of Democrats in the other and funded them both. And in the Republican silo, I do know that the people there met with people very close to Trump. I do know that happened. But the idea that was getting into Trump's head and he was taking action on it, when I thought, well, maybe he is going to pay him $5 billion and he's not going to run for president. I mean, it was proof of concept. He told me it was going to happen or might happen. It happened.
So everyone thinks this kid, who is how old now, Michael? He's
31.
31 now?
That sounds right.
Anyway, everyone thinks he's going to be the world's first trillionaire. Let's break down what he was doing for the Bitcoin challenge, I among them, which I now understand more having read your book and read a lot of articles about this. But think of this as cryptocurrency for dummies. What exactly is cryptocurrency?
It's made up money. So it is an idea that is hatched by someone we don't know who he is, but his pseudonym was Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. And the idea is a means of exchange, a form of payment, a store of value that is not sourced by the government, doesn't come out of the government. It's just like this thing it's
digital currency.
Digital currency. It's just a string of digits, and we're going to say this is valuable, and it's valuable if people believe it's valuable. And when it starts, it seems preposterous. Like, why would anybody want a Bitcoin? It turns out it's not preposterous. Why would people want a Bitcoin? Ends up being an answer to the question. People who are kind of suspicious of governments, of institutions, of banks, people who want to hold wealth in ways that are hard to detect, people who want to make payments without anybody knowing what they've done, that Bitcoin catches on with a kind of a smallish group of people who have got a religious fervor about it, and it's mostly kind of libertarian types. When Bitcoin starts to go up in price, in the first place, there's only one digital currency. It's just Bitcoin. In the end, there are now thousands of them.
Right.
But it attracts a different kind of person when it starts to go up. It's the person who's the first into the tulip bubble craze.
Right.
And it goes from zero, it didn't exist, to at some point all the Bitcoin in the world is worth $1 trillion. And the price of a single Bitcoin gets to almost $60,000. And it's just air, right? It still could be just nothing. But if you happen to believe it or get into it because you think the tulips bubbles are going to go up, people got extremely rich. Like, people made tens of billions of dollars. Totally $1 trillion in holding Bitcoin.
I just don't understand. How can you? I'm really dumb when it comes to financial stuff, Michael. But so you buy it, and then can you sell it?
Yeah.
How do you make money off it?
Well, so it's not like, I don't know, a bond that pays you a rate of interest, mostly. The way you make money on Bitcoin is to buy Bitcoin and hope the price of Bitcoin goes up because other people want to pay you more for it than you paid for it. That's it. There are complicated ways to make money on Bitcoin, and that's what Sam was interested in. He had worked for a couple of years at a Wall Street firm called Jane Street, a high-frequency trading firm. We don't have to get into what that is, but what you can think of it is a machine for making markets really radically efficient. Like, they get, if there's any information that's going to affect the value of any security, they get it into the market in milliseconds. It's a job for, it's sort of like making sure prices are where they're meant to be. And Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, didn't have this force in it. You could at one point buy a Bitcoin in the United States for $800 and sell it at the same time for $1,000 in Japan, which is crazy, right?
Right.
And Sam saw this, and he said, I can apply these same techniques that are used in the stock market to trade the cryptocurrencies where the prices are all goofy. That for reasons.
So he's basically spreading the word about value to all the people who are investing in this?
So in the beginning, it looks like he's making money trading Bitcoin risklessly. Like, it isn't buying Bitcoin hoping Bitcoin goes up, because Bitcoin might just go down. It's buying Bitcoin in Japan, or selling Bitcoin in Japan for $1,000 at the same time you buy it in the United States for $800 and taking out $200 without taking any risk. That was his original idea. Versions of that. There were a lot of versions of that. That's not how he ends up making his fortune. That's how he starts into cryptocurrency. And he
starts as an investor and then figures out there's got to be a way to build a better mousetrap. So he creates a platform called FTX, right?
With that, you can think of that as the cryptocurrency casino.
Right.
And just to sort of ease your anxiety about all this, he didn't know about cryptocurrency. He didn't care about it. I mean, there's a technology underneath it that would take a long time to explain. And every time I think I understand it, I come back and I think I actually didn't understand that as well as I should. He didn't care about any of that. It was just a thing that went up and down like tulip bulbs in price, and then he could buy and sell. That's how he gets in. And he never really has to understand a whole lot more. But what he does see when he gets in is that the exchanges, like the New York Stock Exchange, but they're versions of the New York Stock Exchange for cryptocurrencies, where you can go and buy and sell cryptocurrencies. And those exchanges were a lot of them were kind of flawed. They were risky to trade on. Sometimes they lost everybody's money. And he realized that if you created a better exchange, you could own the casino.
Right.
And if you own the casino, the way you get paid is every time someone comes and makes a bet, you take a little piece of it. You get a fee for every bet that gets made. And so if you're ultimately they're $250 billion a month being traded on his exchange, FTX, and he takes out a tiny percentage, but it ends up being a lot of money.
Right.
So much money that in 2021 they have $1 billion in revenues, $400 million in profits, and venture capitalists are investing in him at a rate that suggests the company's worth $40 billion. And this happens in a matter of 18 months. From the time he creates it in early 2019.
But he had two companies, so he establishes FTX. But the first company he built was called Alameda
Research.
Alameda Research. And that's where the trouble began, because Alameda was again, forgive my financial ignorance, but was the kind of the holding company for people who were investing on the platform, on the FTX platform, right?
So it shouldn't have been.
But it was.
Yes.
And so basically it had to go through this one company to then be invested in the second company. I guess my question is, why did he do that? And could he have done some kind of system within FTX that it didn't have to be first parked at Alameda?
Yes. So let me...
I know.
Can I just restate that?
Yeah, because maybe I did it wrong.
No, you didn't.
Please
you didn't do
correct
it wrong.
me.
So he starts his own little trading firm, Alameda. Then he starts out of that, this exchange. And Alameda is just one of the traders on the exchange. The problem was when he started FTX, he couldn't get bank accounts, like dollar bank accounts, for FTX. So if you, Katie, wanted to put your money on FTX to start to buy cryptocurrencies, there was no account at FTX you could wire your dollars to or bring your dollars to that would hold the dollars that could then be turned into cryptocurrency.
Why couldn't I just straight out buy cryptocurrency without...
You could send them, well, that's interesting. But the reason you're going to the exchange is to buy the cryptocurrency.
Right.
They make it easy for you. So you want to wire some dollars on the exchange.
I see what you're saying. There was no kind of
so the banks were just
thing like to do the, what do you call it when you go to a bank and you do a transaction. Yeah, there was no infrastructure to actually facilitate a transaction. Is that right?
Well,
so if I brought money and said I want to buy crypto,
you can't even. Yeah, you physically couldn't turn up, right? You can go find them in Hong Kong. You got to wire some money into account, and the money is government money. It's euros or it's dollars or it's yen. It starts that way, and so people wanted to wire their money onto FTX. FTX didn't have any bank accounts because banks didn't want to bank crypto exchanges, but they would bank Sam's original trading business, and so in the beginning, you would wire your money to Alameda in order to get it to FTX. And that, which should have happened, I mean, that was already balky. Like, that's weird, and it's amazing that people did $8.8 billion turn up that way, and nobody asked any questions. And I've seen the statements. It says, you think you're wiring it to FTX, but it actually says Alameda on it, or some other Alameda subsidiary. But what should have happened is once FTX got bank accounts, or once it got turned into crypto, that it be held in either crypto wallets or in FTX bank accounts and be completely separate from Sam's trading fund. And it never was. So that's not the only way the customer's money ended up in Alameda, but it's the main way. And one can speculate about how and why it didn't ever get moved over, like that chunk of money. I have my theories, but they're unfounded. And what? Sam's theory, Sam's story is, and it sounds a bit more preposterous than it actually is, but it is still a stretch. Is that by the time they got bank accounts for FTX, the money that had the kind of pool of money that had piled up inside of Alameda was such a small fraction of what was in Alameda.
$8 billion?
8 out of 100. So they were, so that he didn't, that it was just sort of like he wasn't even thinking about it. That's his story. My sense, if it were me, not Sam, the other thing is Sam is different. And so he's capable of thinking things that I wouldn't think, and he was capable of a radical sloppiness with money that I just wouldn't be capable of. But if it were me and I was thinking I have sinister intent, or I just don't care about my customer, I would think, well, I'm essentially, they'll never know, and it's a free loan. Because that's how it functioned, right? It's sort of like the customer's money is in the private hedge fund, and no one's paying interest on it. It's a free loan. It's a free loan. And that's how it looks to most people.
When it all falls apart, how much money was just vanished into thin air?
This is a great question. When the customers all come from their money at once,
there's a run on the platform.
There's a run on Sam's world. There's about $15 billion that should have been there. When they stop paying people back, there's about $10 billion that's still missing. So $5 billion got paid back, and then so there's customers are out 10. There was then what we now know is it was actually, so the bankruptcy people have announced these numbers. There's now $8.6 billion of customers' deposits. Like, customers are waiting to get their $8.6 billion back. But against that, the bankruptcy people have already found $7.3 billion in liquid assets. So the hole right there is $1.3 billion that looks like just went poof. However, in addition, in Sam's world, there were all these investments made that are not liquid assets. They were investments in weird companies, startup companies. And at least one of those investments is clearly worth more than $1 billion. One out of a pile of 300. It's an investment in an artificial intelligence company called Anthropic. So it is conceivable that nothing went poof. It's conceivable that the customers will all get 100 cents on the dollar back, and that what they will have suffered was the inconvenience of waiting for it. And it may be years, it may be 2 or 3 years.
I was going to say conceivable, but likely? I mean, who knows?
Well, look, if it's 8.6 and they found 7.3, and there's one investment in a pile of investments that's worth $1 billion, then it's this question of how much the bankruptcy lawyers charge for the service. But I talk to, there's a market in claims. So if you are, I'm a depositor. I had a little account because I wanted to see how it all worked.
How much?
$2,000. And I bought some crypto and I bought some Swiss francs. I didn't have it all in crypto, but it's in theory that's there. And if I wanted to go out right now, I could get $700 for that claim. Someone would pay me because they think it's going to be worth more. And I've interviewed people who trade in these claims, and they think likely maybe too strong a word, but quite possible that it's going to be 100 cents on the dollar.
Is that like distressed crypto? I don't know. No. Is it?
What is it? It's not even crypto anymore because it's all been dollarized. It's all, what your claim is not in Bitcoin. Your claim, even if you had Bitcoin, if you had a Bitcoin and it was worth $10,000 when it all collapsed, you're owed $10,000. So it's so it seems very possible that people will all get their money back, which would be very Sam Bankman-Fried. It's sort of like this huge mess, this huge drama, this huge social convulsion, and in the end, it's a shaggy dog story.
But meanwhile, he could spend the rest of his life in prison.
He could,
right? I mean, whether people get their money back or not,
that's
right, Michael?
Yep, that's
so
right.
So what charges is he facing?
I've had this explained to me by lawyers. I'm not me talking about the law is like maybe you talking about finance, but I will do my best here. This is what I've been told by a former prosecutor who now is a defense attorney, but she worked in this office as prosecuting him. So everybody's going to maybe be a little stupider for what I'm about to say. I'm sorry if that's true. But I'm told, oddly, that there are no federal statutes about theft. You can't just charge him with stealing people's money. So the charges are the charges that the laws that do exist are about using the federal mails, to using the internet to facilitate a theft. So he's charged with wire fraud, with money laundering, with bank fraud. He's not charged with theft, which is what really is the problem is here. So they're complicated charges. There's 7 of them, I think. They tried to throw in some more, but they weren't able to do it. And when you add up all the charges and the kind of sentences that attach to those charges, he's facing 120 years in jail. But then, so first the jury will decide, convict or acquit. If they acquit, he's off. But if they convict, the judge decides the sentence. And the judge can do anything from just let him go, I mean, like a day of house arrest or something, to 120 years in jail. And I suspect this judge, who has become so irritated with Sam, he can seemingly can't even look at him. Sam under house arrest has not been the best behaved defendant. That the sentence was going to be heavy. I talked to some lawyers about if they were representing him, what would they be happy to settle for now? And they said anything kind of 10 years or less would be great. And unlikely, but they would take 10 years in jail. So I don't know. I think he's very likely going to go to jail. It's possible. You never know what a jury's going to do, that he won't. But he's very likely to go to jail. And what happens to him then? I don't know. I said this on 60 Minutes, and it was a joke kind of, but I think
but I heard you said he'd be happier in prison with the internet than in a beautiful
penthouse with
no Wi-Fi.
Exactly. And he apparently saw the 60 Minutes show in jail, and he apparently told his lawyers that's true. So,
well, you can understand that. I mean, as you said, he lives in his own mind.
He lives for essentially information is food to him. The flood of information is what he needs. And his psychiatrist, his therapist, was an important person to me in the writing of the book. And the psychiatrist said, what will kill Sam is not having internet access. What jail means for Sam, I don't know.
He was surrounded by a lot of it people. Nothing says, I want to be your friend, like someone with a lot of money, right? I mean, you talked about Anna Wintour doing a Zoom. He got Tom Brady to promote FTX. Steph Curry, Shaquille O'Neal, Larry David got paid $10 million to do that Super Bowl commercial. They spent, what, $25 million on that commercial
Great
alone?
ad.
Yeah, it was. It was.
It's
It
funny.
was. Yeah, it was a funny ad. Anything Larry David does is funny to me. But do they have any culpability? You know, they're promoting this unregulated platform. They're vouching in essence for this kid and what he's created. And a lot of people admire them and listen to them and then invested in crypto. I mean, I'm just curious.
What do you think?
I don't think they will, but I wonder if they should.
Everybody was so all in on Sam Bankman-Fried, it would have been unusual for someone not to take the money. That it wasn't, and it wasn't just.
That's when you need Warren Buffett, right?
Yes, that's right. But it wasn't. This is going to sound odd. It wasn't just the money. I mean, many of these people could get their money from a lot of different places. A bit more money than they might have gotten from other places, but they really liked him. They really liked him. And
now, can you understand that?
Yes.
After spending all that time with him.
Because he's so different from anyone they knew, and he didn't behave the way people behave around celebrities.
But such a one-way relationship. Like, do you think he ever asked Tom Brady a question?
No. I tell you a story. This is going back to Super Bowl of 2022, last year's Super Bowl. I'm with Sam Bankman-Fried. We're wandering around Los Angeles. He has these various social obligations. He's got weird invitations. And one of the weird invitations is to a party that's being hosted by someone neither one of us knows, named Michael Kivas. And Michael Kivas, he says, and he didn't even know how to pronounce his name. I don't know if it's Kives or Kivs, and he says, but I hear they're going to be some like fancy people there, and it'll be kind of fun to meet them. And Sam's associates who were with us said, you don't know who this person is. You don't know what they want from you. They might be trying to kidnap you. And so they follow and actually kind of provide support, and we're going to rush in and get you if this is like the Russian mafia trying to abduct you. Because everybody's afraid of Sam being kidnapped because crypto is so easy as ransom. And
right.
So they're really worried about it. So I walk into this house with Sam, and in the backyard is Hillary Clinton, Chris Rock, Leo DiCaprio, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, Katy Perry, Kate Hudson, Orlando Bloom. It goes Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff.
Emhoff, yeah.
Like every like the density of celebrity I've never seen before, and I've been to some fancy Oscar parties. And within about 45 minutes, all the clusters were around Sam Bankman-Fried, and everybody just wanted to hear what he had to say. After the party, this man, Michael Kivas, who I'd never met before, says, you really ought to meet Hillary Clinton. I said, sure, I'd love to meet Hillary Clinton. And she was on her way out. Delightful person. You've met her, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Lovely to talk to.
You haven't met her before?
Never met her before. Lovely person. And I'm on the front lawn, and she says, oh, love your book. So whatever. And I said, nice to meet you. And we're chit-chatting. And she goes, but then she looks at me. She looks around. She goes, what are you doing here?
Did you say, what are you doing
here?
No,
I said, there was her crowd, right? There were 4 Kardashians, too, by the way. That was the great part, that there were 4 Kardashians. So she says, what are you doing here? And I said, this sounds odd, but there's someone here who I'm thinking about writing a book about, and I'm just following around. And she says, the guy with the hair. And I said, how did you know? And she said, I met him, and I thought he's just like one of your characters. That's genius. She was absolutely right. There are 80 people there. She picked out my character. And this was like wherever he went, people wanted to hear what he had to say. And
he was the new.
He was the new thing. He was
right?
the new thing. And it wasn't that this money was falling off him. That was part of it. But it wasn't just that. And it was like...
Well, it was also that he understood this world that nobody else did, in a way.
That's true. He was explaining crypto. But I tell you what the other thing was. He is a response. If you look at the rise of Sam Bankman-Fried and what are the ingredients? The decline of institutional authority in the world, the decline of government's ability to do anything about anything. People are so sick of it. Like, why can't we address climate change? Why can't these problems be? And people are defaulting to looking to people. And he seemed actually sincere in his desire to fix these problems. And people wanted him to exist. that people wanted there to be a Sam. And you saw that. It was palpable. It was not just greed. It was more than that. It was complicated.
One of your former subjects, Billy Bean, he once said you have a this is a funny quote, a horseshoe in your underwear when it comes to finding a good story. I mean, you do seem to really be able to...
I'm sorry, Katie, that's not a horseshoe.
Are you just glad to see me? Anyway. Okay. How do you find these good stories, Michael?
I just wonder. It's not there's no science to it. I just wonder. I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried collides with me, right?
I mean, talk about being at the right place at the right time. It's insane.
But here's what helps. Not thinking you know what the story is. Not prejudging. Not trying to impose order too early on what you're saying. Just feeling like this is interesting and I want more of it.
And I want to see what happens. And having the luxury, to be honest with you, to spend 2 years.
Yes. But then there's a risk. I mean, I got to early November of last year, and I wasn't sure I had a book. I was having arguments with friends about whether they were arguing with me, like, you should do it. And I was saying, I'm not sure. I don't know where it's going. And that has happened to me, that I get stuck in something for a while and it doesn't yield anything. But I've marinated it for a year, and where did that year go? But it's just sort of like, if I'm interested, genuinely interested, not trying to like force some idea upon the world, and I let that interest just flow over me, it eventually leads somewhere good. And what's going on is, if I'm interested, really interested, the reader will be interested. And if I'm not interested, the reader's going to be bored.
But I think also you're able to marry personality with complicated topics, with sort of social impact, and you're able to weave them all together in a way that's understandable and entertaining. And I think that's your gift, Michael. But what do you think of this whole Blindside controversy? I'm having a hard time like keeping up with it, but Michael Orr sues Sean and Leanne Toohey, the subjects of your book, the couple who invited him to live with them as a teenager. All right. So I don't know, just from what I know, I'm sort of taking the Toohey side on this.
Yeah. So here's what you need to know. Here are these.
Am I wrong?
No. Here are the facts. The facts, it's really simple facts. He filed a lawsuit saying that they had stolen his millions of dollars in movie money from them. And the money they got for the movie, I mean, it was my money. That normally what happens is the author sells the book to the movies and keeps the money. And I split the money with my subjects.
That was very nice of you,
I thought so
by the way.
too. I thought so too, but I also thought like I felt guilty just keeping the money.
Well, I don't blame you. I mean, it's their story.
It's their story, but like no one would have heard of the story. Like it was just, no one cared about it. I cared about it, and so I knew that exactly how much money they got. They got half as a family, half of what I got. The total pot was, before agents' fees and taxes, over the life of the movie, which has made $500 million, is $760,000. So their half, after agents' fees, like $350,000, split 5 ways among the Tooheys. So that's how much money he would have gotten. And I knew that. Now this is a story about Hollywood accounting.
Yeah, I was going to say, he must think the Tooheys made all that money when the movie company made all that money.
And I actually explained this to him. He didn't believe me. I think he must not have believed me. It's funny because then I also had an interaction with him. He called me a couple of years ago. I really like him. And he liked the book. It was the movie, and the movie gave him he had issues with the movie. And he wanted to go on the road and make money talking about the Blindside, me and him. And I was game to do it, but it's a little late. You know, it's 16 years later or whatever. There was a big market for it at a time, and he wasn't that interested when the market was hot. And I just wondered. I wondered if he was having money frustration or something. I don't know what was going on.
Well, that's what some people suggested. He kind of had run out of money,
but I don't think he had. I don't know. He made $40 million or $38 million in the NFL. I just don't know what's going on. But it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's heartbreaking. They loved him. They loved him like a child, like their own child. And what I wish he'd done, I wish he'd sued the movie company, because that would have been interesting.
Right.
You know,
I mean, I feel like if they made billions and billions, you sold it for too little.
Well, but got to remember, when I sell it, the idea they're going to make a movie of my book seemed preposterous. I'd sold a bunch of stuff. No one ever made any movies for my books. They never make it. They buy it.
And that was the first one that had turned into a movie?
That was the first one that was ever turned into a movie.
Yeah.
And it only got made into a movie for freakish reasons. No Hollywood studio wanted to make it. So the whole story is a little odd.
I love talking to you. You're such a fun interview. And you're heading out, but
Okay.
I just want to say one thing before you leave. I just want you to know that you and Tabitha and your family have been in my thoughts so much.
Thanks.
Since you lost your daughter, Dixie, and her boyfriend in a car accident.
Ross.
I read that, Michael, and I was honestly, it was from afar crushing. I know that
You know what pain is.
I do, but losing a child, I think, is indescribable and unparalleled pain. And, I know Tabitha a little bit from when she was on NBC and always really liked her. And I'm just so sorry for your loss. And I'm glad that you are moving forward because, I always think we're all terminal. Like, we just have to make the most of the time we have. And I just wanted you to know that you and your family, your two other kids, Quinn and Walker, right?
Right. Yep.
I've just been holding you all in my heart.
Thank you. Dixie's alive in me. She's with me. So she's in this book in a funny way. So yeah, thank you.